Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Marcelo Romanelli, and I'll be your moderator for today's session, You Hired Who? Closing the Workforce Identity Gap. So get comfortable, grab a snack, and get ready for a great conversation with two incredibly accomplished speakers. Feel free to drop a hello in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. And we're running a very fun promo today. Leave a comment or submit a question at any point during the session, and lunch is on us. We'll send you a $25 Uber Eats gift card right after the webinar. For those of you joining a Fingerprint event for the first time, Fingerprint is a foundational layer for fraud defense. Our device intelligence platform gives businesses a highly accurate way to distinguish good visitors from fraudsters, whether they're human, bots, or agents. We help businesses stop attacks faster and stay ahead of emerging AI-driven threats. We can go over to the next slide. Before I hand things over to our speakers, I have a few housekeeping notes. We'll have time for Q&A at the end of today's session, so please submit your questions to the Zoom Q&A box at any point during the conversation, and we'll address as many as we can at the end. Today's session is being recorded, and we'll follow up afterwards with a link to the recording so you can revisit it on demand. And closed captioning is available. You can enable it using the caption option at the bottom of your Zoom window. All right, now on to the good stuff. Today, we're joined by our host, Catherine Woneis, VP of Product at Fingerprint. Catherine leads product strategy and development at Fingerprint and brings more than 25 years of experience across product marketing and product management. Throughout her career, she's helped propel multiple startups from early stage through acquisition. She brings deep expertise in big data, AI, machine learning, and data analytics. And we're also joined by Taylor Liggett, Chief Growth Officer at ID.me, where he leads business development and initiatives across workforce identity, strategic partnerships, and emerging market expansion. Before joining ID.me, Taylor served as head of identity at Sterling, where he built a leading commercial FBI fingerprinting operation and pioneered identity verification in background screening. We have a great conversation ahead of us, so with that, I'll hand it over to Catherine and Taylor to get us started. Over to you guys.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. So here's how we're going to spend our time. First, we're going to frame the problem and then walk the employment life cycle stage by stage. We're going to look at why the hiring pipeline is vulnerable, what application fraud actually looks like, cover the interview and screening stage, and then the part most teams miss entirely, which is post-hire identity drift. We'll then close with a discussion, hopefully getting a lot of questions from you folks, as well as a concrete framework that you guys can take with you in order to be able to help beat candidate and identity fraud. So first of all, let's frame the scope. Two numbers are setting the stage here. First of all, application volume has nearly doubled since 2021. And Gartner projects that by 2028, 1 in 4 job applications will be fake, driven mainly by automation and AI-assisted abuse. Recruiting teams that were previously optimized to look for qualified candidates in a pool of real people who are earnestly seeking employment often feel ill-equipped to handle the scale and scope of the fraud now flooding the application process. Taylor, can you walk us through a little bit of the history of how applicant fraud has evolved? And maybe give us an example of what this type of fraud can look like.
Yeah, for sure. So, lots going on the slide here, but just to kind of walk folks through this is a problem that has been creeping up for quite a while. And I kind of laid out at least what we saw from our vantage point. So, as Marcella had mentioned, prior to my current role, I was the head of identity at Sterling, a very large background screening company. And, we first started to see this issue around 2019 or so when it was very clear that folks were manipulating their PII to basically try and trick a background check. So, for example, throwing off their date of birth or their SSN or their name to try and obscure criminal history background records. And so a lot of our work in identity kind of started there. And then, the pandemic happened. Of course, a lot of work shifted remote. That further complicated this issue. In 2022, the FBI actually came out with a warning saying, hey, we're really seeing at scale stolen PII being used to pass background checks. So a lot of that was the lead up. But when the doors really blew open on this and the game change was in 2023, I don't know how many folks remember when MGM had their ransomware attack. It was a kind of a big deal, very publicly embarrassing. People were locked out of their rooms, casino floor was shut down, etc. The whole way that happened was there was actually it was like a kid, it's like a 19-year-old kid who found a senior IT person on LinkedIn from MGM, contacted their help desk, managed to he knew the individual's PII, managed to convince them he was that person. They reset that account. He gained account access, took all of MGM down in about 5 minutes. That was a big awareness point for bad actors where they said, oh, wow, all of these companies that are kind of cybersecurity fortresses on the consumer side, they're really weak on the employment side. So that's when we sort of categorize as this inflection point hitting. In 2024, we saw just a rift of those attacks, similar kind of help desk, account recovery attacks that started to occur. But then North Korea and otherwise, sort of recalibrated and said, hey, as great as that is to gain this kind of temporary access where we can do a lot of big scale damage, it's much better to just infiltrate companies and be able to play sort of a long game. And so we started to see those attacks really, really ramp up in 2025, not just from North Korea, but from others. And then, kind of where we're at right now, and a lot of what we're going to be getting into is we have a perfect storm. We have AI-enabled fraud, we have remote work, we have nation-state bad actors, and an employment ecosystem that's kind of weak. Not kind of, that's very weak with identity controls today, and that's what we're going to talk about. So, continuing to move on with this, just to give the folks here just kind of a snapshot into a little bit of what we're seeing. And I don't want to misrepresent. There's a tremendous amount of fraud in kind of every direction. DPRK or North Korea is just one part of that. But just to use as maybe a proxy to kind of illustrate some of what we're seeing. At IDMe, we've stopped about 177 North Korea adversaries from infiltrating. This is mostly U.S. companies. That's most of the target. Saw a really big increase last year, about 200% increase. But then this year, April was our highest month on record. Democratic People's Republic of Korea is DPRK. I see a question in there, so apologies for the shorthand. You can translate that to North Korea. And we expect this year to kind of dramatically exceed last year based on what we're seeing so far. One of the things I know that the industry spacing on here is kind of hard to see, but the point of at least showing this graph is that I think a lot of folks have a misrepresentation that they're only attacking IT jobs as an example. And we're seeing this really across the board. Lots of different industries. You can see the top ones: staffing, IT consulting, financial services, fintech, defense and industrial, healthcare, health tech, cybersecurity, and identity. But this is a really broad spread issue and just one little snapshot into what we're seeing from North Korea.
Got it. So, folks might be asking, why is the hiring pipeline such an attractive target for fraudsters? There are three basic motivations behind the rise in hiring fraud. The first one is to gain fast financial access. So folks want to get hired just long enough to redirect payroll, expenses, or signing bonus. The second is long game access. So fraudsters seeking roles that touch customer data, source code, internal tooling. So they get in there and then they monetize that information later. Finally, there's quiet, persistent access. So that's where you're embedding for surveillance or leverage rather than immediate profit. So you've got different motivations, but the same entry point. The threat exists at multiple layers, both before the hire and after it. So today, Taylor and I will be exploring a threat model to cover the full employment lifecycle, along with practical signals to act on every step of the way. So first of all, it's important to look at why the hiring process is vulnerable. Hiring pipelines are optimized for speed and volume. Traditionally, you weren't expecting a lot of adversarial behavior. So bad actors can test, repeat, and blend in with minimal resistance. Oftentimes, HR and recruiting teams are not really trained to look for bad actors, adversarial behavior, et cetera. I know here at Fingerprint, we've had to implement a lot of training around this particular element, and that's been really beneficial for us. In addition, at many companies, hiring activities are spread across multiple third-party systems. For example, they might be doing recruitment via LinkedIn, applications via third-party platforms, via recruiters on your website. Then they're doing interviews via Zoom or Google Meet. Many hiring interactions today are virtual, so largely gone are the days when everyone worked in a single office and candidates came in from just the local area's pool and the receptionist greeted the candidate each time they came in and things like that as well. In addition, generative AI makes it really easy to produce convincing resumes, tailor applications, and submit things at scale. It's super easy to spin up new email addresses. Most applicants use personal email solutions like Gmail, which is hard to detect as fraudulent. There's millions and millions of Gmail addresses out there. Things like anti-detect browsers make it easy to impersonate multiple people from the same machine. In addition, folks are using bots to be able to spread activity across sessions, rotate environments, and return repeatedly. Each submission can appear independent and legitimate. And then traditional controls are really designed to evaluate individual interactions in isolation. So things like CAPTCHAs, rate limiting, basic form validation. They don't give you persistent signals about the device or browser behind them. One of the questions that I see coming across my screen is this a path that companies executing corporate espionage are also taking? Yes. I would say that that's something that we're always on the lookout for, is to be able to figure out, are these folks that are coming in really, trying to do that? Taylor, is there something that you'd also like to comment about that as well?
Yeah, no, I think that's one of the biggest things certainly that we're seeing, right? So there's when you consider the path that a lot of these folks are taking, that corporate espionage is kind of the one of the larger things that we're seeing. If you back up to kind of where I was showing some of the targets in defense and industrial and cybersecurity and fintech and so on, a lot of it kind of does tie back to that espionage piece. I'm also going to be honest, like one of the things that scares me the most is we don't totally know what they're doing, right? Like we see instances, we can deduce from what we see. When there are incidents at companies, we can draw those back and understand. But one of the things that scares me is that we're not totally sure everything that they're up to. All the more reason we have to be really vigilant and get in front of this.
Yeah, definitely. So when we're looking at really what application fraud looks like, and when we're looking at signals perhaps that you can figure out at the application fraud stage, these really cluster into several different categories. So we're really looking at volume and timing signals, behavioral signals, signals about the content and the documents themselves, so the resumes and answers that folks give in forms, as well as identity signals. So first of all, in terms of volume and timing signals, those are where the shape of the traffic itself gives rise to suspicion. So things like application volumes spiking sharply in short bursts or overnight. Times when you get sudden spikes when there hasn't been a new role or a place that you're posting the role. You might see submissions arriving in uniform, almost machine-like waves and so forth. Secondly, we're really looking at behavioral and interaction signals. So that can really tell you a lot. Forms completed in seconds with screening questions answered instantly or sounding like an AI wrote them. Cases where navigation follows a perfectly consistent path from start to submit. Cases where there's no hesitation, corrections, natural variation between sessions, and so forth. And then the content itself can tell you a lot too. So look for things like resumes that share structure, phrasing, or formatting across submissions. Skills that are reading as generic keyword matches and aren't tied to real outcomes. Open-ended answers that reuse the same basic structure or sound AI generated. Batches of resumes that cite the same obscure school, boot camp, or employer. Lots of generic big company or now defunct company references. And then the last one are really identity and contact signals. Things where different applicants keep pointing back to the same source, the same phone number, email domain pattern, or address across applicants. Addresses that are fake or point to a business instead of a residence. Emails that are created very recently relative to the application. Things like freshly created LinkedIn profiles with very little history, too many or too few connections. No real plausible recommendations that sound very generic, or no recommendations at all. Things where they're reusing profile photos or they don't have a photo at all as well. Now, in terms of where device intelligence fits into all of this, I saw a question come across in the Q&A that said, are some of the same techniques that folks are using to be able to submit applications at scale the same techniques that folks are using for being able to get tickets, try to get tickets like bots? Things also like cases where you've got folks trying to pretend to be multiple people to take advantage of offers. So couponing, referral fraud, that kind of thing. It is very, very similar. So and the same sorts of similar techniques can come into account when you're trying to also detect application fraud. So Fingerprint verifies the device and browser behind the submission, and then ID.me verifies the human behind that device. So the first thing that Fingerprint does is we assign a stable visitor ID across sessions. So otherwise separate applications link back to the same browser, even when they rotate IPs or slow their timing. In addition, our smart signals, things like bot detection, proxy detection, browser tampering, and ADB, anti-detect browser detection, flag automation and fraud at the point of submission. So, for example, perhaps a candidate applied for a role in the United States, claiming to reside there, but they actually applied from a country where you don't accept applications. Could they be on vacation and applying? Well, sure, but it is one of those things that might be worth another look. If a candidate is tampering with their browser, trying to subterfuge a fingerprint, or they're using an anti-detect browser to pretend to be multiple applicants, that's a real red flag too. So using this visitor ID together with these smart signals that tell you whether that visitor ID might be sus is a really good way to be able to tell these things so that you can block these automated or fraudulent submissions before they overwhelm your pipeline without adding friction for real candidates. Now I'm going to turn it over to Taylor to talk a bit more about how ID.me verifies the human behind the device.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. So, I think for the folks listening, the way we generally look at this is as you are top of funnel. There's a lot of volume, and it's a fine balance that you work in terms of what you ask candidates to do and not. And so, signal intelligence can be incredibly beneficial. We work very closely with Fingerprint, so everything she outlined is what you want to be looking at that sort of top of funnel stage as you begin to move forward. And now maybe you're interviewing folks, you're background screening them, right? You're sort of working them through your hiring process. This is typically where identity proofing is going to really come into play. And it involves, similarly, some of the device intelligence that Catherine just laid out. That's a core part of our process. But it does more than that in so much as you're really confirming that the person behind this is real and is who they say they are, right? So that's really, it's really deducing and taking it down to that similar premise. Now, on the ID.me side, we have a relatively comprehensive process. The first time we see someone is going to take them a couple minutes, typically about 3 to 5 minutes. Anyone in the US who's logged into the IRS or Social Security Administration, what have you, you've likely used ID.me and gone through that process. But the way that we're set up is essentially it's an identity wallet. So once you go through it once, you don't have to repeat the proofing process, you just have to authenticate. So returning users see about a 30 to 45 second process where we essentially just verify it's still that same individual. What the proofing process entails is a number of things kind of laid out on the right side there. So first, we're going to make sure that the actual government issued ID that they have is authentic. Driver's license, state ID, passport, things like that. We're going to make sure that's actually a real ID. There is tremendous document fraud that is happening right now. So AI, this is an example where AI has just completely changed the game. Getting incredible documents that even trained humans cannot detect is relatively trivial now. So for those of you who, for example, rely on I-9 to be an identity verification point, just understand there's a lot of inherent weaknesses right now because some of the fake IDs that we're seeing, even for trained professionals who have spent a lot of time at three-letter agencies and so on, they're getting very, very hard to detect. There is also then a live selfie that we're going to do. This is a very strong and very important control where essentially what we're doing is we're making sure that it's a real person. So it's not a deep fake, it's not a mask, it's not an image. And then we're matching that to the government ID that we had just authenticated. This is really important because the second thing that AI has again kind of really changed the game on is that you don't really know if what you're looking at is what you're looking at anymore. So when we first started seeing deep fakes, in 2023 or so, kind of laughable. 2024, oh, they're getting better. 2025, it's like, uh-oh, they're getting really good. And now we're at a point where, we're struggling to tell the difference, at least with sophisticated ones. That live selfie with presentation, attack detection, and liveness is a great additional control. And then what we're going to do is we're going to essentially make sure that we check the biographic records of the person. So make sure that, say, in financial records, in authoritative records, you can match that to the identity that we just proved. There's some other things we're doing around device intelligence. Are they actually tied to the cell phone they have? And then IDMe itself, has a significant member base, about 190 million plus people. So we're also looking, have we seen this person before, right? If Taylor Liggett comes in again and we already have them, that's a red flag as well. So that's some of the things, at least, that we're doing from an identity proofing standpoint. I see one of the questions from Ash about does authentications work across employers? And it's a very good question, and the answer is yes. So essentially, like, the way that we've designed this is so that if you have, I'm just going to make up employee, let's say you've come in and gotten hired and verified with IDMe at Goldman Sachs, and then at a later point you go and you work for Lockheed Martin or whatever. You're going to not have to redo everything. We just authenticate, and that travels across employers. We currently support about 900 plus employers. The other thing that is beneficial here, that everyone can think about, is a lot of these bad actors, particularly North Korea, but a lot of these bad actors, they're targeting a lot of different employers. So, one individual may hit 20 different employers just to kind of see what sticks and what they can get. One of the things we're able to do is we're able to save essentially the selfie of the individual. So if we have a bad actor and we see that again, we can stop that by the time it gets to the second employer. So yeah, so Catherine, that's a high level, at least, on identity proofing and where it sits.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So let's say they've made it through a bunch of that stuff, or maybe you're not using IDMe, and so they've made it through the application phase. The good news is you still have places to catch these folks. So you can catch them at the interview and screening layer. This is really where AI has changed the game most dramatically. We've seen everything from deep fake interviews, synthetic resumes, AI coached responses. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that is going on these days with that. So I wanted to start with some of the stuff that we've seen at the interview stage here at Fingerprint. So we've seen video interviews where the lip sync is slightly off, the background looks synthetic. We've seen cases where, believe it or not, there is a different person showing up at each interview. So as you're recording these interviews, it can really help to screenshot it. Say, hey, does the person actually match the person on the resume? Does the person that I'm talking to match the person that you talk to? We've seen folks where there are spoken answers that don't match the fluency of the written application. We've seen cases where spoken answers sound like they're being read from a script. Now, some of this could be somebody really junior and nervous that has read one of those books that says, what are the top 10 interview questions that you get asked in a product management interview? They type out their answer, and now they're reading that answer. Let me just tell you, don't do that, because it used to make it be, oh, this person's really prepared, but now it's going to sound like this person's reading an AI coached response, and they might think that you're fraudulent. Long unnatural pauses, like someone's reading a Fed response. We've actually had folks that have had somebody coaching them in one ear while they're being interviewed. There might be a lack of eye contact, as if they're looking at a second screen, or they might be giving surface level generic answers with an inability to answer specific follow-up questions. So asking questions throughout the interview process that really ask them to, instead of just saying, how would you address this particular scenario, say, hey, how have you addressed it in the past? Or how did you address it at company X? That's oftentimes where people will start to stumble, because they can't just give this generic answer. It's also a really good way to verify whether the person that you're talking to really does have the experience that they claim to have as well. Maybe they respond really quickly to highly technical questions, but they're oddly slow on more personal ones. So for example, if they say, hey, yeah, I'm based in Chicago, and they go, oh yeah, I love this one pizza place. What's your favorite pizza place? And then they stumble on that, like that's automatically a problem. Everyone in San Francisco should have their favorite burrito place that they'll argue with you endlessly on. Chicago, it's pizza, and so forth as well. They might be repeatedly asking for clarification of a question to allow time to search for answers. When you're doing a background check with the person, there are things like references whose only phone number is a personal cell with no footprint, an unverifiable employment history. Some of these things, Taylor will talk about a little bit more when he talks about ID Me. In the funnel itself, we're also looking for where the conversion breaks down. We're using device intelligence to be able to catch the technical tells. So things like using completely different devices across the process. It might be one thing if you're using maybe an iPhone and then you're using a Mac, but if you're using 6 different iPhone models and 3 different Android models throughout the interview process, that can tell you a lot. VPNs that are used to spoof your location. Again, ferreting out, is this person really where they claim to be? Are they trying intentionally to fake it? Does the time zone on their machine match the time zone where they're supposed to be at? And so all of these different things can really help to catch things throughout that interview process. Now I'm going to throw it over to Taylor to talk a little bit more about some of the things that they're seeing today.
Yeah, so next couple slides, we're just going to go through some of the tactics that we're seeing. We talked just a little bit about this, but I think everyone certainly should be paying attention to deep fakes. We're still in a place now where they're not everywhere, but that's rapidly changing. And by the end of this year, by next year, we're going to be in a completely different space. So I mentioned some of this earlier. 2023 is when we first started seeing these. So ID Me, by the way, like we have different ways we can verify someone. So most folks go through, our self-service pathway. So it's technical controls they're doing on their phone or their desktop or laptop or what have you. But one of our core ethos is kind of no identity left behind, right? So making sure we're able to verify everyone, no matter what their circumstances are. And technology, as good as it is, it's not perfect. And so we have humans that can step in and human-based verification pathways that happen. And so this is where we've seen a lot of deepfakes start to take shape. In 2023, like I said, very easily detectable, literally kind of laughable, but it was beginning to see what we saw there. 2024 and 2025. You can start to see this technology really develop. So there's actually a little screenshot you can see there. The video is even more powerful, but you can see that in this screenshot in the top left-hand quadrant. That's what we saw when we were proofing the individual and working through there. There were other signals that started to kind of throw off the representative, we call them trusted referees, who is verifying this individual. And so what they did is they had the person hold the ID in front of their face. At this time, what that did is that worked to break the deep fake. And so you can see what happens when they actually held it in front of their face. You can see all of a sudden the mouth completely changes. You can see the eye totally changes, right? Because now we're seeing the real person, not the deep fake there. This was actually featured in 60 Minutes. It's something you guys can go look at. But now, fast forward to where we're at now, it's becoming virtually undetectable to us, at least when you're talking about nation states and very sophisticated attempts. And so one of the things we've had to do is we've had to actually augment the human-based pathways with technical controls. So for example, you can work with a human, we can go through everything, but you're gonna have to pass a liveness verification essentially in order to be able to work with that human. And so I think as employers are really looking at this, there's 2 things to consider. One, the last stat I heard, there's about 16% of recruiters who had already experienced deepfakes. We're going to see that dramatically increase as the technology gets better. But also, as you're considering any current processes where you're relying on video-based interactions, whether that be for I-9 as an example, or manager-based interviews, it's just something to become aware of that is getting compromised more and more as each week goes by. Again, I mentioned this a little bit before, but we also have an instance now that everyone needs to be aware of just how good document fraud has gotten. Document fraud is something that I think for the most part that I've been working in I've been in the identity space for a long time, 10, 15 years. Most of that time, it was relatively easily detectable. Like people did good and there were some good documents out there. But for the most part, if you were trained, knew what you were doing, you could tell. And a lot of the technical controls worked very well. Now, in the age of AI, we're seeing a completely different situation, and this is really a whole ecosystem that's been created. So you can procure basically about whatever you want on the dark web. There are whole sort of forgeries as services that are out there that work amongst there. There's credential harvesting that happens, and one of the things I think that's important as you consider thinking about fraud is not some guy in his basement doing this. Fraud is a very sophisticated ecosystem. One of the stats I heard that was super alarming to me is that if you took fraud and equated it to essentially an economy, fraud would be the third largest economy in the world. That's how big this is. We protect a lot of the government. It's estimated between 500 billion and $1 trillion a year. Just in the U.S. government is lost to fraud. So tremendous amounts of money in this, tremendous amounts of innovation, and document fraud has gotten really good. So again, just as you're thinking about stuff like I-9 and other areas where you may be looking at documents, just understand the world's changing very rapidly there. Just to highlight some unique things. So as we started to get really good at stopping deep fakes in our human verification channel. So these are things, again, similar to an I-9. Someone would get on a call, they'd upload documentation, they'd show that documentation to the person, so their ID or what have you. What we started to see is, this is an example, this is a North Korean who was working to try and get hired at a healthcare company, a health insurance company that we were protecting. They came in through a human pathway. And what they did is they used their real face. However, what they did is they applied digital injection to their ID. They just forgot to turn it on in time. So we caught on the left the clearly fake, whatever library card or whatever that is, before it got superimposed into what is a very sophisticated looking, fake ID. So we were able to detect that. But again, the point is you're considering your own things. Someone can now come on a video stream, hold up what appears to be a super good fake ID with their real face, and it's not that. It's what you'd see on the left. So what they're doing is just continuing to innovate here. And then finally, this is the one that scares me the most, and I think should scare all of us the most. There's now a lot of proxies that are being utilized. So in other words, you think you're hiring one person, you're interviewing the individual, they may be the person showing up to work actually. That's not the person who's actually going to get the laptop or have access to the system. This is just one example of an individual we stopped. They were working to infiltrate a US automotive company, caught it during the background check when we had some of these identity controls in place. But we're seeing this now a lot. One of the stories that I like to share, because I think it highlights this in a way, is that one company contacted us freaking out because they had held their new hire orientation where folks came in, were given laptops, etc. And at the end of it, an individual came up to them and said, "I can't do this. I'm being paid. I'm working with North Korea. My conscience can't take it. I'm giving you back the laptop." And they said, "Oh my God, had this person not had a crisis of conscience, we would have been infiltrated." And so, we're seeing this a lot more, and it's just another reason that we're going to talk about it later, but kind of persistent identity that you have to make sure, hey, is the person I interviewed actually the person that showed up to work, is an important control.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. That's fascinating. One thing before I kind of close off on the application process and the interview process and so forth, I did want to add a note about how honest people who are desperate to make an impression, break through a system they feel is really rigged against them, are starting to use AI in the applicant process, thinking it will help them when it's just making them look like fraudsters. So, for example, folks are uploading multiple versions of their resume to see which one uses the right keywords to break through an ATS system. So they're not necessarily trying to be fraudulent. They're not trying to pretend to be multiple people, but they're trying different flavors of things and applying multiple times. They keep an AI assistant on speed dial in interviews. They're hoping to optimize their answers in the hope that the right answer is what's needed to get them hired. I wanted to address this one up front because this is really the easiest type of activity that looks like fraud to overcome. So, a lot of the suspicious behavior that we've been seeing, multiple resume versions, AI rehearsed interview answers, it's not fraud. It's candidates responding rationally to a hiring process that already feels unhuman. It already feels very automated and keyword driven. If you've got an ATS doing all of your scanning and it's scanning for exact phrases, people are going to optimize for exact phrases. It's not deception. It's trying to meet your system where it lives. So one thing I'd love to invite folks to do is to take some time to not only look at how to detect fraud in the hiring process, but also to see how you might be unwittingly encouraging job seekers to insert deception into the process when they're not trying to be fraudulent. Build some flexibility into your ATS system so you're not too strictly applying keywords in the process. Move your screening questions toward asking for specific outcomes and experiences that are hard to fake even with a great prompt. Get people really talking. Try to figure out, ask them questions about things that excite them, about things they really enjoyed, things that can inject some emotion into that so that you are talking to the real human in the process. Normalize disclosure. So, for example, when we're doing our engineering interviews and prep, it's okay to say, hey, I used AI to prep this, because it really starts to feel like a competency. We want folks that know how to use things like Claude Code, how to use ChatGPT and so forth to look for answers as a valued assistant. And feeling free to admit that, hey, I used AI to help, really starts to feel like a competency and not a confession. You want to build in live unscripted moments in your interview process, asking follow-up questions, using different phrasings, doing an on-the-spot pivot, because that's where the real signal shows up. That's where you can often start telling, okay, is this just a really nervous applicant that over-prepared? And within the first 5 minutes, you can maybe shift that to, let's have a real conversation, or gosh, no, they can't have a real conversation. So either they're not qualified for the role or they are trying to be a fraudster. Using AI today is actually really important these days. So the question shouldn't be, did they use AI in the process? It's, can they explain and defend what's in front of me? Someone who can't reproduce their own reasoning live, who's lost when you ask a follow-up, that's your fraud signal. Someone who used AI in order to tighten their resume, but can still walk you through every line and the story behind it, that's just a prepared candidate. So if you can get that distinction right, you can stop chasing decent applicants out the door while the actual bad actors sail through. So you're really trying to stop those things, tell it. The lines between fraudster and desperate person are often blurred. And so just kind of be aware of that as you're working through the process as well. And then once you're through that, as Taylor hinted at, you're not safe after day one. So I'd love to hear Taylor talk a little bit about what they call post-hire candidate drift.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. So, I think for everyone to kind of see, we put together this illustration to just kind of help, because there's basically, I think, two broad categories that every organization, every employer should be thinking about this in. One is the pre-hire stage. That's what we spent most of our time on, right? Is like, how do you make sure the person that's coming in is not fraudulent and so on. So the second point, though, is, okay, now you've hired them. And I think one of the things we take for granted or don't think about enough is that employers and companies typically spend a lot of money on zero trust architecture and cybersecurity platforms and, the Oktas and Entras and all these things. But if those aren't built on a strong foundation, it's all for naught. And a lot of the way those systems work is they inherit identity. Meaning, if you deploy Okta, Entra, et cetera, they're not verifying your employee is who they say they are. They're trusting you did that. They're assuming your credentialing process was strong enough to get that, and then they're controlling access of where that person goes. And so one of the things we strongly are advocating for is, if you are verifying the identity of someone as you're hiring them, tie that same credential to when they show up to work. And then use that to kind of feed into your identity and access management systems and your overall security aperture to make sure it's the right person. And then what you can do is you can essentially tie that same credential to any type of high-risk device, right? So, or high-risk transaction. So maybe you're giving them a device. Maybe they're doing a password reset. Or one of the biggest things is account recovery. That's a huge threat vector. That's where we've seen companies lose literally hundreds of millions of dollars because someone captured an account where they were able to do extreme damage to the company, ransomware, things like that. And so this is where we are really encouraging companies to step back and kind of understand, okay, what's your identity and security strategy? And how can we look at the points that matter the most to us through this life cycle to make sure we're not experiencing that post-hire identity drift, and we're making sure that the person that we hired is the person that's at work, and then throughout the various stages of their work, it's still that same individual. This is the world we're starting to really operate in, and this is the way that we're sort of envisioning things. And one of the reasons why, when you look at solutions as well, you want to look at that combination of making sure you get incredible, signals and device intelligence, and then also ideally tying that to like a wallet-based approach where that can travel with the user, so they're not having to hit friction at all these different points as well.
Got it. Yeah, no, definitely. Can you talk a little bit more about how drift happens
Yeah.
and when it happens?
Yeah, for sure. So ultimately, like there's a number of different ways that you'll see this. So one is you have, we talked about this a little bit before in the proxy scenario, but you'll have handoffs that can occur, or laptop farms, or areas where you sort of think that you've given the right person the right credentials, but then those credentials are being shared, handed off, or provided other access. You see, compromised accounts. So you'll see scenarios, like I said, on the sort of the account recovery side of things. If someone's committing fraud, they're pretending to be someone, they're taking over another account. You also see a lot of issues with contractors and non-FTEs, right? So like you may have strong controls over the people you're hiring directly, but how do you know your contractors and suppliers do? Those can also be weak points. And then, you can just see a number of different areas where a lot of the exploitation that happens is that bad actors have become aware of the weaknesses in the system. So they kind of know that, hey, like this interview platform isn't talking to this background check platform, and the background check platform isn't talking to the IAM platform, and so on. And so you see different people at these different points, or fraud that's sort of committed between that. And then everything else that the slide sort of accesses. Employees that leave, you're not tracking that. Maybe they retain access. Accounts pass between different team members without there being verification controls in place. And to highlight it here, all the signals that you can look at in addition to any type of identity controls that you have in place.
Excellent, excellent. So we're going to sum it up fairly soon, but I would like to remind folks that we are going to have a live Q&A in just a couple of minutes. So if you have any burning questions to ask either Taylor or I, please do enter those into the Q&A piece, into the chat, so that we can answer those at the end of the call as well. I know we've addressed quite a few good questions here too, so do enter those in. In addition, really to kind of sort of close it out here, to bring it together, the fix isn't really about just checking at one particular point. It's really around a persistent identity model across the entire life cycle. You need to verify the human and persist at submission. So, for example, you've got, as Taylor was just talking about, ID.me confirming a real unique human, confirming that human's credentials and so forth. Fingerprint confirming the device, assigning that unique stable device ID, being able to flag automation before it floods the pipeline. Secondly, you want to make sure that you are carrying signals across all of your systems. So throughout the interview process, you want to be continuing to link those identity and device signals across your ATS, your video, your background check vendors, really help stop those gaps between platforms. And this is where, if there's anybody that's attending the presentation who's from one of these platforms, I think the more partnerships you can build with platforms that are used throughout the process, the more that you can enforce that consistent identity and create those hooks, the better. Fraud really lives in the gaps. Fraud thrives where there are gaps between handoffs, between systems, and so forth. So the more that the vendors can all work together to be able to help enforce these things and see each other maybe less as pure competitors and more as folks that are partnering throughout that process, the better. And then even after the hire, monitor for drift, watch device switching, watch geo inconsistency, look to see, is this employee actually where they said that they were going to be employed from, not just for fraudulent purposes, but also for compliance purposes and things like that as well. You want to check to see, session anomalies in your internal tooling. Can you catch handoffs? Can you catch compromise? Can you do all of those other things? And then also, as I mentioned, don't over-index either. Realize that there are real people that can sometimes look like fraudsters unwittingly and try to kind of thread that needle throughout that process. Taylor, do you have any kind of final comments before we open it up for questions?
The only other thing I'd add is, you made a brief comment in this in the beginning, but I really feel right now for talent acquisition teams and HR folks who are never really trained for this to be the situation, right? Like we're in a new uncharted kind of territory, and there's a lot that goes into that, and it's a complicated problem because you have what sometimes is referred to as big F fraud and little F fraud. And little F fraud is all the things we've been seeing for a long time, but that are kind of on steroids now of using AI to cheat through interviews and embellishing resumes and all of those things. And then you have the big F fraud of espionage and infiltration and so on. We got to guard against both those things. It's complicated to do. So I think Catherine did a great job of sort of running through everything, and hopefully this information is helpful to you folks. But that's the final thing I kind of add.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So one of the questions that's come across is, do we see similar emerging use cases beyond hiring and recruitment? From the device intelligence standpoint, definitely the class of one person pretending to be somebody else. That's a big one that happens in many different cases where they're trying to do that. The other one is somebody pretending to be multiple people. So this is often done where there might be a promotion. So somebody is trying to sign up multiple times as a new user, take advantage of a free trial, try to get around firewalls, or not firewalls, but paywalls for content. I think most of us have probably signed up for an account with a newspaper, gone through that 7 days of free things, and when you're out of the 7 days, you just sign up with a different email address, and look, now I've got another 7 days. Sharing passwords across multiple devices. So somebody who's trying to share that's another thing. So we do see a lot of different use cases around someone pretending to be somebody else, somebody pretending to be multiple people, someone pretending to be somewhere else. And then lastly, trying to recognize good returning visitors as well. I mean, that's something that I think that we're seeing. Taylor, are you also seeing some similar types of patterns as well?
Yeah, I mean, look, workforce is a super hot topic right now because the stakes are really high, and I think we're kind of caught with our pants down, so to speak. But we're seeing this across the board. I mean, there is really fraud right now is a pretty scary thing. I think for all the amazing things AI has brought in, it has also enabled tremendous sort of scaled fraud. And so some of the particular areas I'd note is government-based fraud is off the charts, right? So everything related to government benefits and so on, which has been the case for a long time. It's just gotten a lot worse. Similarly, we're seeing a tremendous amount of student fraud. So if you think about things like financial aid and otherwise, we have poor universities that think they have, a huge number of students that are showing up, and half of them show up because there was half of that was just fraud to get, student aid and manipulate that system. Someone called out earlier sports and entertainment. I mean, it's just all e-commerce, healthcare, financial, it's all over the place. And unfortunately, it's only going to get worse. I think the thing that we have to prepare for as organizations and then just as consumers is, when we're in a world where you can't really believe what you see and fake documents are ubiquitous and so on, how do you guard against that? And a lot of the things we talked about today will come into play.
Yeah. Another question that we got is, we've spoken about application hiring and initial starter drift as being parts of the employment journey that are opportunities for fraudsters. Are there any other parts of the journey that you've noticed? So one thing that we've also seen is longtime employees being recruited after they've been there for like a year or so. That might be wittingly or unwittingly. So, for example, we've had folks who were approached by quote unquote consultants who wanted to pay them for their time and ask them questions about their industry and their company and things like that. And it turned out that consultant was actually a competitor. So there was that. They could also be approached because all of this information on LinkedIn and so forth is open. They can also be approached by a bad actor who says, "Hey, not happy with the amount of money that you're making now. We can sweeten that a little bit for you if you want to do that." So there's that as well. Taylor, have you heard about other cases too?
Yeah, I mean, if you the life cycle slide we showed up, it's happening at every different step in there. I think to give maybe two examples we didn't talk about in depth. One is for everyone to be aware of, there's a flip side of this as well, where actual applicants are being targeted themselves. I'm sure everyone on this call has probably gotten a text from Amazon or whomever who's, hey, we're trying to hire you, and it's, clearly a scam. A lot of people sadly fall for that stuff, and there's also a lot of very sophisticated things where bad actors will take extreme lengths to set up very good fake looking websites that are garnered to essentially, we're offering you this job, you need to apply. And a lot of those are scams, sadly, in most cases, to get someone's identity information, and trick them into providing that. And so just for everyone to be tracking job related scams, I think they've increased 500% in the last couple of years, are a huge other factor that's hitting the flip side of this with candidates. So everyone's got to be on kind of guard with this stuff. The other thing I just call out is that a lot of folks have unfortunately misplaced security on the background check step. Background checks are very important, but they're only as good as the information provided. So essentially, a candidate's going to provide their name, their date of birth, their SSN, and their address. That's then used to run the background check. If any of those things are wrong, the background check's not going to come back with the results that you'd see. Even if the background check company finds them, they look and they see that there's a difference in a discrepancy in information. They're not going to report that for fear of getting sued. And so that's something we're seeing spike up a lot, where individuals are purposely throwing off their SSN or DOB or name to trick background checks. Those are some other areas to be aware of.
Got it. So I think that is it for our questions. I'm going to turn it over to Marcelo now to close us out.
Thank you so much, Catherine. All right, so that brings us to the end of the session. Catherine, again, thank you. Taylor, thank you so much for such a great conversation and for sharing your insights with us today. And if you found today's discussion valuable and want to keep learning, we have a resource for you. Scan the QR code on the screen to read our latest piece, How to Detect Bot-Driven Job Application Fraud in ATS Platforms. And if you'd like to learn more about how Fingerprint can support your organization and your business goals, I've just dropped the link to our contact us page in the chat, so you can just submit your information over there. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you at the next one. Thank you.
Thanks, Taylor. Thanks, Marcelo.
Thanks,
all.
folks. Take care.